16,112,566. That's how many there were of us in the armed forces between December 1941 and December 1946. And 15,738,000 of us came back alive. All 15 or 16 million of them. They were thinking of home, about the wives and the kids they left behind, or the girls they were going to marry, and the children they'd have. And they were thinking about how they wanted to live, and where. Not holed up in one room back at their family's place, not cramped in a dingy little apartment, and certainly not in anything like a Quonset hut or any other kind of temporary housing, federal, state, or municipal. No, sir. We wanted the real McCoy, a place of our own. Not just any old place, though, but a place of which every average man could proudly say, "This is my home."
About 7 years ago, we started going around the United States, gathering up footage and interviews for several documentary projects. And a lot of times when we would do this, we would be gathering for more than one project at a time. Sometimes we had to sleep in our car because we just couldn't even afford to stay in the places we were trying to film. It was just way too expensive. And sleeping in a car sucks, just by the way. And right now, there are lots and lots of Americans tonight who are doing that because they don't have a choice. We've been through every contiguous state, at least a little bit, in this country. I mean, I've never been to Alaska or Hawaii, but I've been everywhere else. And I can tell you it was sometime around 2017 that I really started to notice a change sweeping over the major metro areas and even the rural areas of this country. I noticed a huge increase in homelessness across major cities, whole entire areas of major cities that look like bombed out war zones that you're driving through during the daytime and you don't feel safe in broad daylight. And we also drove through several Midwest areas for one of our projects. And there are whole towns that just look like ghost towns that just completely fell apart and were abandoned. And you can tell it's deindustrialization that has happened there. And lots of places where the only businesses that seem to be doing well are banks, mega churches, and universities. And everything else looks like it's falling apart. And that was before the pandemic hit. But what we're seeing now, and I don't think America is alone in this, but this is where I am, so this is what I can speak to. What we're seeing now is a meteoric rise in housing costs and rent and homelessness across this nation. And this is everywhere. I was looking through headlines, doing some research gathering for this piece, and you can find headlines for every single state in this country. So there's not a place, there's not a corner of this country that is not being touched by this housing crisis right now. I mean, we were personally affected by this last year. We had been living in the same rental property for 3 years. We paid our rent not only on time, but a lot of times we paid early. And when our lease came up to renew, they came in and inspected the place and they said they were doing it all for renewal. We're like, cool. And then we were just suddenly told to get out because I guess Tesla moved into the area or whatever, because we were living in the suburbs of Austin. And we were just told to leave. We had a little over a month to find someplace else to go. I mean, Just on an aside, think about that. You're doing everything right. You are paying your bills on time. You're doing everything right, technically. Nope, get the hell out. We could sell this property and make bank on it, so go F yourself is essentially what happened, you know? And we had a little over a month to figure out what we were going to do amid a massive rental boom that pretty much made finding a place really, really hard. I remember at one point we were literally headed to an appointment to look at a place we were hoping to get, and they called us on the road halfway there and said, no, we just signed off a lease to someone else. There's no point in you coming. That story is not even remotely unique. That we're like so many other people that this is happening to everywhere.
Imagine the day when you see your rent will go up by more than 50%. Suddenly, you're not getting by, you're getting out with maybe no place to go.
According to an April 2022 report from the real estate brokerage firm Redfin, the median monthly asking rent in the U.S. increased 17% year over year to a record high of $1,940 in March 2022. The largest annual jump since at least February 2020. Meanwhile, the national median monthly mortgage payment for homebuyers rose twice as fast. It climbed 34% year over year to $1,910, which is also the biggest increase in Redfin's records. In some places like Austin proper, rent increases averaged 40%, which priced people out entirely, and there are lots of news stories coming out of Austin talking about how people just have to leave.
The city of Austin is looking into fixing high home prices and rising rent. The average home going for $530,000. The average rent rate around $1,500 a month.
And because of that reason, the two people I'm about to introduce you to had to move away, but they're not alone. Several have had to do the same, and others are in the process of leaving Austin.
Not only that, but in March 2021, Moody's Analytics reported that there's less housing available for rent or sale now in the United States than at any time in the past 30 years, with the largest shortfall in housing supply in nearly half a century. And they're only projecting it to get worse. And while housing costs and rent are skyrocketing, the increase in housing costs is not being met for most people with any sort of increase in wages at all. So more and more people are finding themselves unable to afford to pay these insane price increases just to keep a roof over their head. A couple weeks ago, this article went up on NASDAQ.com from a Motley Fool contributor, 3 charts that show how serious the affordable housing crisis really is. And the second 2 charts discuss the house-burdened households. So a family is considered house-burdened if they're forced to spend more than 30% of their monthly income on rent. That's kind of the gold standard, or at least it has been for budgeting. But as you can see from looking at this chart, that's not even remotely what's happening in most states. It's crazy out there, what they're expecting people to pay just to stay living in their house. And this chart is followed by this chart, which is the number of housing cost burdened households in the United States among renters from 2003 to 2019. And as you can see, it's just been going up every single year, pretty much, except for maybe 2017, it dipped just a little. But we're at 44 million households right now. And that was 2019. Right now, it's probably much higher because this is not counting, obviously, the last couple years for the pandemic and all of the crazy skyrocketing housing prices that are occurring across the board. And they're projecting that housing prices are going to continue to rise this year. And it says up here that this 30% cost burden is no longer the gold standard, but an idyllic goal that is unattainable for the average American. And I just want to point out that in most places where people rent, your landlord can raise your rent to whatever price they want. It has nothing to do with whether or not the place you're living in is worth more, or they've made some kind of repairs or remodeling that makes it worth more, anything like that. The property value of a rental property can actually go down and the rent can go up. That's just how it is. Doesn't matter.
And I've seen people have these arguments like, well, if it's just so expensive, you should just move. But
People's entire lives are connected to these areas. What are they supposed to do? Quit their job, hope they find another one, hope they have enough money for first, last months and deposit at some new place, hope they have enough money to also move because that costs money too, and hope they have the time off to do all that? It's not feasible for most people. And then other people are saying, well, you know, just cancel your Netflix subscription and stop eating out and then you'll be able to afford it. That's not the levels of increase in cost we're talking about here. Just by the way, cost is increasing so much farther than just, well, if I lay off the Netflix and chill, I'll be able to handle next month's rent. We're talking of insane increases in rent. That even if that person canceled everything and started working 100 hours a week, they wouldn't be able to afford just the rent, let alone all of the utilities, gas to get to work, childcare, food on the table, basic stuff.
Metro Detroit families priced out of a place to live. It is the first of the month. Rent is due, and a lot of families will not be able to pay it.
A separate report found Detroit is now the fourth most expensive city for rent.
Rents in Tucson are rising far faster than paychecks. That's driving some people out of their homes.
From January 2021 to January 2022, average rent in Oregon has increased 50%.
Some people are now being asked to pay hundreds of dollars more this year compared to last. Average rent in the city of Atlanta up nearly 18% compared to the start of 2021.
We know housing prices are up here in Central Ohio, but some renters say they are being priced out of the Columbus apartments that they have called home for years.
Currently, we have a vacancy rate of only 2%. In a healthy market, that number should be closer to 4 or 5%. But I spoke to a woman who says that her rent is increasing nearly $500.
I don't know how anybody can afford it, and then to have to try to move, to try to find something different, where else am I going to go?
Rent prices have soared more than 20 to 30% in the last year across Tennessee. Those numbers come from the Knoxville Area Association of Realtors. That spike in costs is leaving many families in a bind and pricing more out of their homes.
I have no idea how to fix it. They just want to get more and more money. It's only going to go up and up as we go, but wages are going to stay the same. I'm a 50-year-old man with a roommate now because I can't find anything I can afford on my own.
Opening an email from the Solé Apartment Management Group, a tenant who did not want to be identified out of fear of retaliation had a bit of sticker shock.
And I was like, well, is there anything I could do because I can't afford this?
She rents an apartment for $1,590. This email shows the rent increase to $2,247, a more than 41% increase for her apartment on Annunciation Street.
Even long-term renters are facing unheard of increases.
How is that legal?
David Salisbury Fry and Claudia Friedlander are musicians. They've lived on West End Avenue near Lincoln Center for 15 years. That is, until they opened a rent renewal offer on New Year's Day.
They planned on raising our rent 74%.
The landlord made her an offer she couldn't refuse. A special pandemic rate, $1,945 a month. 1 year later, how much was the rent hike? A whopping 41% to $2,745.
When I opened it up and I saw an $800 increase, I immediately started crying.
When we moved in, our rent was $1,450.
It went from $1,450 to what in 2 years?
Our lease renewal that would start June 12th is $2,200.
I'll do the math for you. That's an increase of $750 over 2 years.
Looking at homes in St. Johns County, the market's just terrible, but it is comparable to a mortgage payment for a $450,000 house right now because we ran the numbers. And we live in a 2-bedroom.
Now, last year, an average 1-bedroom in Boston cost $2,000 a month. Well, this year, it's about $2,600 a month.
This year may bring prices renters have never seen before.
I think we're going to break the records in terms of pricing, rental pricing.
The smallest apartments out there across the county, studios, are up 21%. According to new data from Rent.com, the average price for a studio in our county is $2,378, up 21% from last year. And a 1-bedroom is up 18% to $2,707. And that's the average. In Spring Valley, 1-bedroom apartments jumped 65%. And that's not even the biggest jump. In Encinitas, 3-bedroom apartments are up 82%.
The average studio apartment here in Tampa Bay is renting for $1,700 a month. And most renters are spending about half of their income towards rent. Ebby spotted a listing for a 337 square foot apartment priced over $1,800 a month.
It's estimated in Missouri 121,000 people could be evicted in the next 2 months. Approximately 3,000 in the city of St. Louis alone.
Where are they going to go? There's no place. There's no extra places to live.
A Valley man says he got this notice. The rent would go from about $1,500 to $4,000 a month for this property. And if he's outside a lease and still staying there, there's a day rate to live here, about $260 a day, or close to $8,000 a month.
When you saw that, what'd you think?
I laughed. Literally, I laughed out loud.
Miss my friends that I've made.
She's been living in these independent living townhomes in Missouri Valley since 2015.
Well, when they first opened up, I was one of the first ones.
But she's on her way out the door to avoid a hike in her rent payment.
I think I'm going to be the fourth one to move.
But soon after management was turned over to Asria Health, a company with facilities across Nebraska, Iowa, and Kansas, she got a letter stating she'd soon have to start paying $1,500 a month, much more than the $850 she pays now.
There's no way ever I could ever afford that on my income. Nobody pays that much for rent.
And so for people who are living paycheck to paycheck, forget it, because I mean, your car breaks down, or you have one medical emergency, or I guess they just raise your rent, and that's it. That's it. You will lose everything. You might be homeless. I mean, that's the level people are at. It's even worse for people on fixed incomes who have Social Security, disability, or people who are in Section 8 housing and trying to rebuild their credit, things like that. People don't even rent to those people anymore.
Because by the time we call to try and advocate for our families, 30 people have already called that landlord looking for housing. And so I've literally had a landlord say, your program sounds great, I just don't really need your money right now. Because they already had 30 applicants in a 4-hour window. So it's really a landlord's market, and not every one of the people we're working with looks great on paper. And a lot of times they don't have any rental history. They're also asking for things like 650 plus credit score. The people we're working with, we're trying to work on their credit. They're not starting at that score. The other thing is they're asking for 3 times the rent. So even though they have a way to pay for rent because it's subsidized or they have a voucher, landlords still don't really need that.
They're asking for 3-4 times the rent. You have to make at least 3 to 4 times the rent. They're asking for really high credit scores, which, there are people out there who are working on building up their credit scores, but it's been a really rough time. People are eking by at this point, and now this is hitting, and it's hitting so hard.
Coming back in as a housing specialist is the first time I've heard over and over, I've never experienced homelessness before. I don't know what to do. I need some guidance. Whereas, like Margie said, we were working a lot with people who were chronically homeless. There was a cycle going on, and we were trying to break that cycle. Whereas now we're trying to prevent a cycle. I've worked in California, I've worked in Washington, I've worked in Colorado. This is like the first time I'm really hearing that over and over. I've never experienced homelessness. I don't know what to do.
And the housing market on the other side of that has gone completely insane.
Act fast and be prepared to pay up. That is the advice realtors are offering to everybody trying to buy a house right now in Atlanta. Prices are rising at the fastest rate in 30 years. If you're looking for a house, good luck. Inventory is low.
You have massive investment management firms like Blackstone Group, which is the world's largest real estate investor, and owns Invitation Homes, which happens to be the biggest owner of single-family homes in the United States now. They're going around with billions of dollars just snapping up homes with all-cash offers well over asking price.
Home prices surged in many areas, squeezing out millions of would-be home buyers looking for their piece of the American dream.
Anytime somebody wants to come here and buy a house, it was just an absolute, kind of feeding frenzy.
Bidding wars,
all cash offers above asking price, virtually standard.
Which the average home buyer cannot even remotely compete. And there are a bunch of articles out there about this. This one in the Wall Street Journal from April 2021 is if you sell a house these days, the buyer might be a pension fund, but they talk about in here that you have pension and private equity firms with billions of dollars. They're just going around buying whole subdivisions. This one's talking about how there was a bidding war that broke out with a new subdivision in Houston, and the winning bid was $32 million, which came from an online property investing platform. And it was twice the price, roughly twice what it typically makes selling houses to the middle class.
Tricon is trying to buy 800 houses a month, and there are companies even bigger. Invitation Homes owns more than 80,000 rental houses. American Homes for Rent close to 60,000. Some of the all-stars of finance, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Blackstone, have put hundreds of millions of dollars into these companies.
So the average person is not competing with this situation, even remotely at all. And this article came out in the New York Post in July 2020, how corporations are buying up houses, robbing Americans of the family dream. But it was talking about Blackstone again with Invitation Homes, and they went on a $10 billion shopping spree back while everyone else was freaking out, losing their jobs during the pandemic. These people went around with their $10 billion buying $150 million worth of houses per week. And it goes on to say this guy was a house flipper. He was in an auction in Sacramento, and they bought the whole block of houses. So this is not something the average person can even remotely step to.
Here are two examples of homes Tricon recently bought in Jacksonville. This one, they're charging 40% higher rent than the previous owner asked. This one, 30% higher.
You are seeing a lot of these Wall Street investors that are coming in. You know, you put a house on the market and within an hour, I'm getting offers full price, cash. Typically, the investors never look at the home. Never.
They don't even look at the home.
They never look at it.
That, plus the fact that investors often waive inspections, puts would-be first-time home buyers at a serious disadvantage. Before they can even see a starter house, it's gone.
And this is locking individuals and families out of the one thing in this country that has traditionally been the key to building wealth, which is homeownership. And now that is just out of reach for a lot of people.
And there is no one factor more representative of or more conducive to the economic well-being of the American citizen than the home in which he lives.
Here's how you buy a home in Boise. Beg the seller to let you overpay.
I mean, I think this video I saw in the News and Observer kind of sums it up. This is out of Raleigh, North Carolina, and it was taken by a real estate agent. This house went on to the market for $260,000. It was a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, regular single-family home, 1,400 and some odd square feet, and it was listed for $260,000. And people were lined up for blocks to try to get this house.
Okay, everyone. So I am here showing my client a home, and I just want you to take a look at all of the people who are lined up to see this property. So when we say that there is a housing crisis, we really, really mean it. It's absolutely insane. The line goes all the way in the back. It's not even 5:30 fully, and someone stopped me and they wanted to know what was going on in the neighborhood. And I just told them the truth. I said, we're having a housing crisis. And this is a home that is priced under $300,000 here in the Raleigh area. And as you can see, there are just cars upon cars upon cars. And there are a ton of people that are trying to see this home. This is absolutely ridiculous. We have got to get control over these prices and the housing inventory. Absolutely crazy. And people are so desperate for a home, you know, under a particular price point because people don't make as much money. But there's there's just a lot of people out here. This is just absolutely insane.
And it ended up selling for $70,000 over the asking price.
Compare what you have just seen with a typical American home, which is available to our average worker at a cost equal to his earnings from about 6,000 work hours. To begin with, there is such a wide variety of architectural styles and floor plans that the buyer can usually find exactly what suits him best in the location where he wants to live.
So what you have, essentially, is you have these giant investment firms. They're coming in. They can pay all cash. They don't even look at the property. They don't care about inspecting it. They don't give a crap at all about any of it.
Investors buying up low-priced properties, fixing them up, then raising those rents. Affordable housing advocates say this has been happening a lot over the past few months.
They flip it, turn it into a rental property, and then they jack the rent up 30-40%. So where a 3-bedroom would have cost a family $1,500 a month rent or $1,600 a month rent, now it's $2,200, $2,400 a month rent. The wages in that area have not changed. The price of you're getting paid to do your job has not gone up at all. But the cost of the rent is so high that a lot of these people can't afford it.
There's people that have money to get in to places, but there just is nothing that's affordable for somebody working a regular, job.
And I'm talking about teachers. I'm talking about people who change the oil in your car, people who work at the grocery store, people who cut hair, all, the basic services that keep a society going. Those people can't afford these rents. They can't even get approved for them. They're too expensive.
Paying as much as $2,000 for a 1-bedroom apartment, and rents are going up everywhere. Today, members of the State House Commerce Committee learned just how dire the situation has become.
I'm an economist. I've been a practicing economist in Arizona for 53 years.
Elliot Pollack used a slideshow to reveal that the median home price has risen 216% since 2000, but the median income has only risen 48%. By 2025, it's possible that only 21% of the population will be able to afford to buy a home.
And that's a crisis. That's a real issue.
And police officers, firefighters, teachers, construction workers, and retail workers are already priced out of buying a home and are increasingly priced out of renting one.
That is enlightening and a little scary.
And there's not enough affordable housing to accommodate what they can get approved to afford, because all the prices have just gone out the freaking window.
Rent here in Indianapolis is doubling, if not even tripling in some areas. We're learning it's in part due to out-of-state companies buying up houses only to rent them out.
They can offer all cash, very short closing times, no due diligence, no inspections. They'll then do what we would call a flip, but they're not going to sell it then, they're going to rent it.
Sarah Korst, Associate Director of the IU Center for Real Estate Studies, says more and more out-of-state and even some in-state investors are buying up houses across Indianapolis. And it's not just one or two here and there.
Developers have started developing an entire for-rent neighborhoods to sell to these people.
She says it's been a buyer's market for the last 5 years and that there's been a 15% increase per year for home prices in Indianapolis.
We're not going to give you a new lease, but we'll let you be a month-to-month tenant going forward, but increasing the rent by 100% or 200%.
And so now what you have is a lot of people who are having to live in their car, live in hotels, live on families' couches. They don't have anywhere, whole families don't have anywhere to go because they've just been priced right the hell out the door. And they're saying it's only about to get worse. And it's about to feed a homeless crisis because it's an affordable housing crisis to begin with and a housing crisis to begin with.
Retired social aid worker Kim Williams says several tenants she knows have been evicted after their landlords raised their rent or their income requirement.
They're living from couch to couch. The shelters are already overfull.
There's nowhere for people to go. Some of those people were barely making it on the rent they were already having to pay. So when that goes up $500, $800, $1,000 a month, those people don't have any more blood to squeeze out of that turnip. There's nowhere to get that money. It's not coming out of like, well, maybe if I just don't eat food ever again, maybe then I can afford to pay this crazy ass rent. Like, no, it's not happening that way. This is too much money to all of a sudden just be slammed with a bill like that. People can't, there's nowhere to get that from. What are you going to do? Sell your firstborn or your kidney or something? Like, even then you still couldn't afford it because it's every month and it's unrelenting.
The number of Americans living without homes, in shelters, or on the streets continues to rise at an alarming rate.
The problem of homelessness has been getting worse in this country compared to a few years ago. From 2007 to 2016, it had been going down pretty steadily every year. Starting in 2016, it's been creeping up every year, including this year, as far as we know.
And do you understand why that is?
I think it's largely due to the lack of affordable housing and housing getting more expensive, and also what people earn purchasing less housing.
So now we're feeding our affordable housing crisis, which has already come to a head and a tipping point, is now feeding into what's about to be a homeless crisis.
More and more people are moving in and out of Austin than ever before. The housing crisis is not only forcing people to move to different homes, it's also forcing more people out on the streets.
Advocates tell Spectrum News among the homeless they're helping right now, a major factor is affordable housing. And nonprofits are also critical of how the city is handling the housing crisis. Weekend Now founder Anthony Jackson was on the scene during a homeless sweep when crews found a woman dead.
Because a lot of these people are going to not have anywhere to go when they can't afford this insane rising cost of basic roof over your head.
Boise has become America's most unaffordable housing market. One study compared Boise's median-priced home, almost $535,000.
Right now at the shelter, it's at maximum capacity.
We're at a tipping point. It feels like we've never seen numbers like this before. Before we responded, we had to send 20 people away from our shelter on Friday night when it was really cold. We were serving about 175 people in this building, which is not safe, but the alternative is to freeze to death. And so clearly we need to expand low barrier shelter availability. We need to get more affordable housing. We need to control rent and not let it kick people out of their housing. Some of these systems are making people homeless, and we don't have enough agency to take care of that growing problem.
This may not sound nice, but I'm going to quote what the stereotype is. They believe we are dirty, filthy POSs, and that we're all bums, drug addicts, and alcoholics. That is not so. There's many, many issues that have led to homelessness. High prices of housing. When you get a little over $800 a month to live on, as I do, on disability, it's not possible.
So what's happening now is reports are coming out warning that there's going to be a homeless surge because more and more people are just not going to be able to afford these insane rises in housing costs, which are not being met with rises in wages.
Never seen anything like it.
She says in less than a year, 5,000 families have reached out looking for help and a place to live. Even more startling, 2,000 of those 5,000 families started reaching out about 4 months ago. Breaking the numbers down even further, and that's about 500 families a month.
And so many families just can't do it, and they are finding themselves in hotels, on the streets, looking for shelter.
There are many factors adding to this growing issue. However, the main cause, soaring rent prices. According to Apartments.com, rent in the Tampa Bay area increased a record 24% in 2021, the highest in the nation. And Long says it's causing another trend.
We are definitely seeing a whole new population of people coming to us for shelter. And these are folks who've been working, they've been paying their rent, they've been doing fine, and all of a sudden their rent increases significantly. They can no longer stay at their apartment.
Because the family want to be entertained, they go to the movies, to restaurants, to nightclubs. And all these goods and services must employ people to supply the family's needs. Drug and proprietary stores, wearing apparel dealers, other retail establishments. Each exists and prospers only by serving the family.
The lower income people that keep basic businesses going, things like service industry and stuff like that, I mean, those people are being completely priced out of even affording to live in most of these cities that need those services. I put up a thing on our Twitter account. I said, got stories from your area about an increase in rents or being priced out of homes or a rise in homelessness. People are saying they can't move. People are saying they're afraid to ask their landlords to fix anything that's wrong with their house because they don't want their landlord to get fed up with them and sell the place. So they don't even want to tell their landlord if something breaks. This person says, my sisters and coworkers are essentially being kicked out of their apartment because the rent went up too high. This person said they had their rent increase 45% because the person who owned the property sold it to one of these corporations and they raised the rent on everybody. This person says, I'm in Atlanta. Metro rent is up 30%. It's horrendous. This person says they've been searching for a 2-bedroom apartment in Missoula, Montana, and that they make a good wage for the area, but renters are requiring that tenants make 3 times the rent. So even a studio apartment's well over $1,000, and nobody makes that there because the average person doesn't make that much. Someone else said that out of Missoula. They said that the average person makes less than $15, but the rent has more than doubled in the last 2 years, so that the majority of people living in that town can't afford the basic cost of living in that town. And this person's from Phoenix, and they said the metro's insane and that homelessness and encampments are moving into the suburbs. And that's what's going to, by the way, happen all over this country. I've seen that happening more and more, but people are living in their own little bubbles here and there. They don't realize the whole NIMBY attitude, the not in my backyard attitude about this. This whole country is about to be one giant backyard with these policies and what's happening and how people are being priced out of the basic necessities of life. I mean, shelter is a basic need. You have to have some place to go. And they keep clearing homeless encampments because more and more people are homeless now than ever. This homelessness has been rising since 2016.
In one of the wealthiest areas in the world, hundreds of people living in squalor. A Santa Cruz resident provided Fox 2 with drone video showing a Santa Cruz homeless encampment flooding during Monday's rainstorm.
From above, you can't deny the stark reality. This is what Portland's other epidemic looks like. It spreads across the city into neighborhoods, along streets, alongside highways, next to homes.
See the homeless camps everywhere in Albuquerque, from city parks and sidewalks to the side of the freeway.
The mayor's office hopes consolidating the encampments will help make the city safer and make it a whole lot easier to provide resources to people living on the street.
Advocates say that the homeless crisis near downtown Phoenix is only getting worse.
3 times a week down here in downtown Phoenix, the city, accompanied by Phoenix police, will come down here and conduct homeless encampment cleanups. A new bill at the state capitol would make it mandatory for homeless camps to be properly permitted like other campgrounds.
State senator that filed the bill says homeless camps like this one under the highway bridge in Norman pose a health and a safety hazard. Others say he's weaponizing the permit process for a quick fix on a problem.
More and more homeless encampment tents are popping up across the Austin area, regardless of the camping ban voted back in place last year.
A large camp along 700 West in Salt Lake City has been removed by police and county health officials.
Now, the health department does say that this had reached unsafe levels because of the amount of trash and debris here. They say they've cleaned up around 100 tons of belongings and trash as a part of this cleanup effort.
A growing homeless encampment in the North Loop has the city of Minneapolis and local businesses in search of solutions.
The biggest challenge is obviously the concern for the people that are in there.
Neighbors near this property on North 5th Street told us the tents started going up last month. What started with just a few has grown today to more than 40.
Once again, homeless camps are being asked to move out and move on in downtown St. Louis.
Homeless living near the Dome at America Center are being evicted. An eviction notice on the side of the McGuire Moving and Storage building says to be out by Monday.
Some are considering a shelter, while others are just moving across the street, saying shelters are not safe.
As Colorado's homeless crisis is coming to a head, the mayor of Denver announces next steps to help get people off city streets. If you've been in downtown Denver recently, you can't help but notice one of the many homeless camps lining the sidewalk.
Some residents say having a homeless camp down the street from their homes and businesses doesn't help. Neighbors say they've seen the camp grow from 2 to 3 tents to now dozens.
The standoff that's been unfolding over the last several hours in the East Village, activists protesting the clearing of a homeless encampment by the city.
We're on 9th Street, just east of Avenue B. This street has been closed off since early today as a standoff developed between a homeless encampment here and authorities trying to clear it. Over the last 2 weeks, the city has gone around and tried to remove encampments. An estimated 250 have been removed.
I'm right here at that homeless encampment, right off the Interstate 10 in Banning, right off of San Gorgonio Avenue. Now you can see it right here behind me. It stretches for about half a mile long along the street.
Right on, as it goes by, we'll be starting over again for the 39th time in his years on the street. This time he hopes to have something to take with him. Right On was one of just 11 folks left here Monday morning. Starting Tuesday, what's left behind and deemed to be trash will be thrown out by the city.
People in Atlanta going about their day drive by this spot daily and wouldn't have any idea it's there. The people who call it a home call it a city within a city.
In just the last days, the city of Boston cleared out this full sidewalk of tents. This street is supposed to be next, but it's -9 wind chill today, which only speaks to the complications of those living here.
2 homeless camps in high-profile areas will no longer be cleared out just weeks before the Kentucky Derby.
I think it's time to try something new.
Those camping out under the overpass on Jefferson and Jackson no longer have to clear out next month. Homeless advocate Jeff Gill calls this a win for the homeless and those trying to serve them.
Typically when there's a clearing, it just means displacement. Just moving from one spot to another.
This unhoused resident says he's still waiting to move into housing through the program.
Everybody that chose housing put an application in. Like me, I'm just waiting for a move-in date.
For the last 10 years, he's lived at the underpass, hoping to move into an apartment sooner than later.
The camp here under the Mulberry Street Bridge is located next to a huge parking lot for trucks. As you can see, this is one huge camp. And then there's many more tents and camps located directly under the bridge.
It is just simply inhumane.
And you have people who are obviously they're concerned because there's homeless encampments everywhere, but also where are these people supposed to go when these cities come in and clear these encampments out?
I have nothing of mine, not one freaking thing, not a piece of clothing, not a coat.
Well, everybody's forced to move. Most of these people have not a place to go to, and you know, there were a lot of talking about going to the river, and I just heard that the rangers are blocking access to the river. So I don't know what's going to happen. You know, last night I showed up and there were still 25 people in their dwellings, and so this morning has been quite the challenge. A lot of depression, overwhelming.
I only have one picture of my kids. I'm not going to be okay without it.
I mean, you can keep pushing people around, but they're human beings. Where are they supposed to go? These shelters are overflowing, and a lot of people who are on the streets, I've seen a lot of videos. I've watched so many videos in the last couple weeks researching this, and I can tell you, a lot of these people say they're afraid to sleep in shelters because a lot of violence happens in these shelters. It's very scary, and they would rather take their chances on the street than sleep in one of these shelters.
Violent stuff going on in the shelters, you know, like stabbings and stuff like that. You know, it's very dangerous, man. You know, like, and yeah, just nobody wants to be a part of that sort of life. Like, who wants to live like that in danger all the time?
Those shelters aren't designed for women. Like, there's too many registered sex offenders, too many, you know, it's the sexual assault and the battery and everything. It's too much. It's too much. I would rather take my chances out here. And that's sad. It's hard.
And also, being in a shelter is not, in a lot of ways, for a lot of people, this is not a pathway to getting out of this situation either. We need something that's actually going to help people not be in those situations. And you have states like Tennessee, where they're just making camping illegal, there's other places that are outlawing sleeping in your car. I'm just wondering what they expect human beings to do. If you raise the price of living to a cost that no one can afford, where do you expect people to go? They're human beings who are alive. If they're not allowed to sleep in their car and they're not allowed to sleep in a tent, where are they supposed to go? Okay? So a lot of these towns are so inundated, their shelters are overflowing. They don't have enough room for everybody now. And a lot of these people who are living in their cars, by the way, have jobs. And they still go to those jobs every day despite the fact that they have to live in their car.
Next to a parkway, in this parking lot, 54-year-old Maria begins her day. Maria no longer has a place to live. She's been sleeping in her van for a year now. Just like Maria, around 30 other people sleep overnight in their car in this free parking lot. Most of them work. They're security guards, Uber drivers, secretaries, or even computer technicians.
This is every day.
I've only had to spend a few nights in my car before, and I was homeless for a short period of time back in college. And I can tell you, living in your car and going to school and work, which I had to do, is really hard to do. And unless you've had to do that, you really shouldn't be casting stones and judging other people. Because it is extremely tough to not give up when you're in that situation. When you're in dire poverty, it feels like you're facing a giant brick wall that you don't have the physical ability to scale. This is what it feels like. It feels like you're pushing against a brick wall. Good luck on getting that to move. It feels hopeless.
I've had several people call me and say, my rent's just gone up $600. I can't pay it anymore. I'm going to be homeless.
Crisis calls she and other members of the nonprofit Tent City Helpers respond to every Monday.
It's sad that this is an option even.
Harvey and her team go under bridges, behind stores and other public spaces, distributing supplies and homeless resource information.
There are people out there that are working their butts off and trying to make a living without a shower, living in their car, trying to find, a way to make it without housing.
I've seen a lot of judgmental comments where people say, well, it's so many lazy people who just do drugs and drink and they're just like, whatever. I don't think you can't just blanket say that everybody starts out that way. I think some people lost everything they had because they got laid off and they couldn't afford anything anymore and they got thrown out into the street and then they pretty much gave up. And I'm not saying that's great or anything, but again, until you've been in that person's shoes where you've lost everything, it's kind of hard to be throwing stones at other people and telling them what to do. And a lot of these people that are doing it, they're doing it like we still live in the world we lived in 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or the 20th century. And we don't live in any of those places now. Financially speaking, a lot of stuff is pretty insane right now.
The COVID pandemic caused a surge in housing costs and a rise in unemployment, leaving nearly 600,000 Americans unhoused in 2020.
We have to shut down a piece of our own humanity to be able to walk past another human being that is in such difficult situation. What people don't typically realize when they walk past a person who's homeless is that this person is costing taxpayers a lot of money.
Cities across America are spending more than ever to combat the crisis. In 2019, New York spent a record-breaking $3 billion to support its homeless population. California is also expected to break its record, allocating $4.8 billion of its budget to the same issue over the next 2 years.
It has now been posted here. The city of St. Louis will remove this long-standing tent village at the entrance to the old Admiral Casino on Laclede's Landing. At the same time, another tent village has popped up miles away in South St. Louis along the River Des Peres.
There's this notion that we already have enough. If we already had enough, we wouldn't have individuals sleeping on the River Des Peres.
People want to infight with each other on political lines like it's a blood sport about topics like this, but I am telling you right now, this is happening everywhere, regardless of what kind of governor is running the state. The affordability crisis, the housing affordability crisis, that's been in the making ever since the 2008 collapse. And if you go to this website, National Low Income Housing Coalition, housing needs by state. There's a little drop-down box here. Select a state to explore that state's data. And I went through every single one of these. You could go to any state on here, any state, and you could see how many tens of thousands of houses. I think the lowest amount I saw was over 10,000, 11,000. But every single state in this country is lacking housing for people in the very low income bracket. So this is happening all over the place, and the homelessness is on the rise all over the place too. And even though, California seems to have institutionalized it with what they got going on out there.
The Super Bowl at SoFi means tourists will be flooding the streets of LA, and one thing on full display almost anywhere you go, our unrelenting homeless problem.
In LA and in towns across California, it's as though homelessness is so common, it's been normalized, and yet so far from normal for anyone else.
It's not something that you actually thought was going on here. And you see it in films, but you don't actually think that that's true.
You have to remember, California is a very warm state with more open policies, so people are going to migrate there if they're in this situation. If you're homeless, would you choose to be in California or a place like Maine, where it gets to be very, very cold? Although I will say, Maine is also experiencing a homelessness crisis.
In community after community, people who once managed to keep a roof over their heads while struggling to make ends meet are now left without a place to live. It's a clear sign of how dire Maine's housing crisis has become.
So, I just found out Minnesota is 13th in the nation for homelessness. I had no idea, because somebody posted a picture of tents going up in the small town in Minnesota. They said they'd never seen that before. People are saying they are seeing this now in places where they've never seen it before. Homelessness. Because people are being priced out of life in this society now.
So it is that what just one average family in one average home requires in goods and services, multiplied by the total of home-dwelling families in the nation, is the incentive force which powers the United States of America as the country possessing the highest standard of living in the world.
Actually, it was happening before COVID happened. It was growing. Homelessness was growing. The lack of affordability and affordable housing, that was hitting crisis levels, and that was prior to COVID. COVID just made it all explode. But I have been able to find stories on this coming out of every state. So here you go. You have Alabama, city in Alabama among rising rent leaders nationwide. Alaska apartment and home rents are up, vacancy rates down. They have a lack of housing. You have 6 Arizona cities topping the national list for rising rents last year.
It's been heartbreaking.
Ballooning housing costs in Northwest Arkansas are now requiring an approach because they don't have enough housing people can afford. California's rising rents and severe housing shortage are now fueling their homelessness, which was already at crisis levels a long time ago. So this is just making it crazy worse. And by the way, speaking of California, San Francisco rations housing by scoring homeless people's trauma. By design, most fail to qualify. So they have a process they call coordinated entry that's supposed to help homeless people get housing. And the kinds of questions they ask homeless people are things like, have you ever been sexually assaulted while you were homeless? Have you ever had to use violence to keep yourself safe? Have you ever exchanged sex for a place to stay? And this woman just had she was homeless and she lost her twins in childbirth, and they were asking her these questions. And she said, those are the questions that really bothered me. Whatever my experience is of being sexually assaulted or what I had to do in order to stay safe on the streets shouldn't really pertain to whether or not I deserve housing. And then, based on whatever score she was given in this questionnaire process, she was informed that she wasn't high enough on the trauma scale to qualify for permanent supportive housing. And she felt like that was devastating after she was already experiencing all the things she just went through. She said, if you put me on the streets right now, mentally, I'll kill myself. This is the situation here. They have millions and millions and millions of dollars. They have an ability to get people into supportive housing, and they're keeping them out with a trauma questionnaire. I don't know if you've seen what's going on in San Francisco, but it is shameful. This article just came out literally yesterday in the San Francisco Chronicle. Broken homes San Francisco spends millions of dollars to shelter its most vulnerable residents in dilapidated hotels with little oversight or support. The results are disastrous. At the very beginning of the article talks about how they put up this homeless woman in a rundown century-old hotel in the Tenderloin, which is the worst area for this in San Francisco. She lived there for 2 years. It says it had a rodent infestation that became so severe, this woman was forced to pitch a tent inside of her room to keep the mice away while she slept. So essentially, this woman is still homeless and living in a tent. She's just not doing it on the street where other San Franciscans can see it. It is absolutely shameful and disgusting to have a city with such obscene amounts of wealth and have people treated with such little human decency and dignity in these ways. You're telling me it's the 21st century and we have not figured out affordable housing in what we're told consistently is the world's richest country? We have not figured any of this out, how to do this right. It's just too hard. Millions and billions of dollars are being spent, record numbers this year in California, and to figure this out, but they can't figure it out. We could send billions to the war machine and billions in aid all over the world and billions here and billions there, like it's monopoly money and it doesn't even matter. But we cannot figure out a way to help people who are already here try to live here. Apparently last year, homelessness, home prices, and rent all rose in Denver. And it says if you waited a year to buy the same exact house, the price would have gone from $455,000 to $545,000. You have soaring apartment rents in Connecticut, squeezing tenants in a tight leasing market. Rising housing costs, leaving few options for workers in Sussex County, Delaware, so the workers can't afford to live there. I just didn't have any money. Florida residents are struggling to afford rising rent costs for housing. Georgia housing costs have exploded. Hawaii's housing market is squeezing out renters. I mean, you're on a freaking island in Hawaii. Where are you going to go if you don't have any place to live? And by the way, I also saw an article that just came out after I recorded this that people are buying one-way tickets to Hawaii now. They're using all of the last money they had to buy a one-way ticket to Hawaii with $2 in their pocket left over, and they get off the plane and they immediately ask for the homeless shelter services. So I guess people are figuring if they're going to be homeless anyway, they might as well spend the last money they got and go be homeless in a place like Hawaii. So that's a thing now. You have rent in Boise, Idaho. Prices continue to increase faster than anywhere else in the United States. Some of the highest median home prices in the nation in freaking Idaho. You have Iowa's affordable housing struggle and how housing costs are rising much faster than wages, which is something that's pretty much happening everywhere. You have a housing crisis in Chicago and Illinois. You have Indianapolis receiving almost $10 million for their homelessness efforts. Kansas housing advocates are warning of a looming eviction crisis. Out of Kentucky, fewer options, higher prices make for tight rental market. Average rent is now the highest it's ever been. And on top of that, the tornadoes that happened in December have now compounded the existing housing crisis there.
In Kentucky, tornadoes claimed at least 74 lives and destroyed more than 1,000 homes.
Missouri's eviction crisis could be a humanitarian tragedy. Almost half the people living in New Orleans are renters, and advocates are worrying about an eviction crisis there. You have rent prices in Maryland continuing to rise. Average rents in Boston are now the highest they've ever been. Ever. Just ever. You have the cost of rent on the rise in Michigan. You have rising home prices and rents weighing on Minnesota lawmakers.
Minnesota's housing commissioner puts it.
We do face deep housing challenges in every corner of the state.
Mississippi organizations that are having to come together to mitigate homelessness. You have homelessness increasing in Montana last year by 16%. Rent prices are rising in Nebraska. They're also rising in Nevada faster than almost anywhere else in the country. A new report out of New Hampshire shows that the rental market is brutal out there. Studies showing that rent in New Jersey increased 27% over last year. Lawmakers are now moving bills to tackle the housing crisis that's coming out of New Mexico. You have New York lawmakers urging chief judge to avert eviction and homelessness crisis in housing court. That one came out just a couple days ago. Officials in Charlotte, North Carolina voting to make camping on city property a crime because of how many homeless encampments have now moved into North Carolina. North Dakota's Association of Realtors president saying the housing market has priced some out of their dream homes. You have a new effort to combat eviction crisis in Toledo. Complex affordable housing crisis on display across Oklahoma City. Rising rents, low inventory, and high demand in Oregon. And Pennsylvania has an affordability crisis and homelessness issues as well. But I had to throw this one in there. Philadelphia officials consider resolution designating Kensington a FEMA site. There is a channel on YouTube that all they do is drive around the Kensington area and film what they see on a daily basis. They just put up a new video every day driving around Kensington, and it is just block after block after block of trash and people shooting up drugs and passed out on the sidewalks. And it's a horrifying human tragedy that is happening out on these streets. And it's almost unbelievable that this is happening in real life in America in 2022. That is the reality. I have a history book on Philadelphia that was put out for the Centennial Celebration, 1876, because they had a huge exhibition in Philadelphia and they were really showing off all of these technological advancements and the city itself and how it was going to set the pace for the world as one of the most affordable, amazing places to live at that time. It says, it is the boast of Philadelphia that her working classes are better housed, better fed, and better clothed than those of any city in the world. The expenses of living are moderate as compared with New York, Boston, Chicago, or St. Louis. Baltimore alone, of all the large cities of the Union, surpassing Philadelphia in cheapness of living. The houses of Philadelphia are as a rule constructed upon a uniform plan, are admitted to be the best arranged internally of any dwellings in this country. And to see it today is just heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking that this is the level that we're at in the Philadelphia. So they're thinking about declaring it a disaster zone. It's been reported as maybe the worst place in the United States, although I don't know, have you ever seen some of the clips coming out of Oakland?
Oakland, California sure does have a homeless problem. Driving around town, there's homeless encampments all over the place. They're on the sides of the roads and dirt lots. There's long stretches of them on sidewalks. Some are in tents, some are in RVs, some are actual encampments with makeshift structures where hundreds of people gather into communities.
Anyway, moving on. Rhode Island's trying to address its housing crisis, and millions that were meant to improve the situation remain unspent. And this is apparently happening and been happening with increasing frequency all over the country, that you just have all this mismanagement that's costing millions of dollars in federal aid for housing, wasted, unspent housing grants in places where people are desperately needing them, but somehow they're just not getting them. $99 million in unspent rental aid meant for Floridians and affordable housing returned to the state. Funds that are unaccounted for. That there are eviction filings, like in Texas, it's among the nation's highest, as millions of relief dollars go unspent. Oakland, which I just showed you a few years ago, failed to spend $2.2 million on anti-displacement and homeless assistance. And this just came out as I was recording this. New Jersey officials blasted over $2 million of mismanaged housing funds. So this is happening all over the place with increasing frequency in a way that just doesn't look all that accidental when you see it over and over and over and over. I mean, you think if they got $2 million, somebody could buy a calculator. It's just a thought.
Commissioner Luman May voiced he wanted to make sure the board was using the money toward a sustainable solution that involves more than just putting a roof over someone's head.
A look at rising rents and vanishing eviction protections in South Carolina. Need to address homelessness in Sioux Falls on the rise. That's South Dakota. Homeless numbers continue to rise due to the lack of affordable housing in Tennessee. Texas tenants hit with soaring rent increases are seeing little relief. Utah rents are expected to keep going up. And apparently the housing is one of the most serious problems Utah faces with their housing shortage right now. They're actually setting restrictions on short-term rentals in Burlington, Vermont now because of the housing crisis. And Charlottesville, Virginia's affordable housing crisis is a long time coming. Didn't happen overnight, they say. Special report homelessness in West Virginia. Cost of living in Washington state, rent rises to 5th highest in the nation. That was just from a couple weeks ago. Wisconsin's affordable housing crisis. And in Laramie, Wyoming, homes are scarce and unaffordable. So there's nowhere in this whole country that doesn't have this issue.
Well, how did we get here? Minnesota housing officials say the state is 40,000 units short over the next 5 years, much of that in the Twin Cities. Advocates for price control say some landlords are taking advantage of low vacancy by hiking rents.
Lifting rent controls while homes are still scarce would break all other price controls. Such a break of the line would be followed by skyrocketing prices and the kind of headache we had after World War I, which started when rents jumped 50% after Armistice Day.
Going back to the 2008 financial crisis, and then looking now at what the trend has become, the economic vulnerability really began to pile up for the middle and lower classes. By that point, it wasn't even clear how much of a middle class even survived. Coming out of the end of manufacturing, the end of the Industrial Revolution for the First World, transitioning fully into this information society and post-industrial sustainable society, all buzz terms. Now certainly the only things thriving are a swelling bottom of poor and struggling, a subset of the truly desperate, setting into concrete of hopelessness and despondency. That and an insular class of rich, well-to-do, a class within a class of those hoarding wealth, starving to spend over disposable income, bleeding effortless profits, gorging on second and third and fourth homes, mansions, and those inner city apartments towering over all those staggering and crumbling below. Those who profit off of financial services and surcharges and rate gouging, usury, combined with algorithms and data trolling, and those generally pirating off of the haunting, lingering specter that once was the American dream. Back then, as the housing market burst and taxpayers funded huge bailout efforts to prop it all back up again and carefully glue back together the pieces, the real estate giants and the most sporting of the Wall Street poachers began an organized effort at buying up single-family homes, often leaving them empty until someday they were rented back again at great profit. Profit that didn't require trades and equity that would come with homeowners buying in from the ground up.
There's people burning trash in a barrel in this alley.
As the crisis and news of its mismanagement faded over the years, rather than building back personal wealth and attempting to sustain a stake in the economy, a growing number of Americans went on autopilot, keeping the facade going, but having many panics every 5 minutes as sensational news, emotionally driven mini moments scrolled through at an ever-flowing rate on their screen. They paid on credit and pretended it was all going to keep going. All of this, we understand, was continually fermented. They were moralizing on cable news outlets and left or right-leaning websites as new measures of control over censorship and of separation and reconjunction were repeatedly churned, oscillated, amplifying extremes, exaggerating differences, and distracting like a big, ugly plague from the real, slow death steadily rolling in. Then everyone turned their eyes to the main stage. The spotlight drew everyone's focus. The other circus rings were dimmed for restaging. The ringleaders had us cowered in fear, covering our faces, rolling up our sleeves. The public, generally frenzied, panicked, reaching new levels of previously unknown dis-ease with their surroundings. Jobs died, money shrinked. The most desperate gave away their facade with a twitch in their eye, increasingly involuntary. And then we turned around. 2021, 2022. Home values soared out of reach. Money's values shrank as inflation reared above surface again. The entire economy was kept on the metabolism of the printing of the Federal Reserve and the central banks around the world. Jobs for some evaporated. Others quit over their conditions, lured by dangling benefits and a means to survive. Meanwhile, many more than we'd like to admit trickled into the streets, flooded into the most base and hopeless circumstances, and no longer marked just by ne'er-do-wells, addicts, and bums. Now, with an uncomfortable trickle of professionals, the employed, who still can't maintain. And again, we see the hidden hand of firms that have bought out homes, skewed prices, throttled personal investments, shut out lower classes, choked out middle classers, and held back progress with a cutthroat game of musical chairs. How can you live? How can you be stable in a game of musical chairs? No permanence. You can't trust the chair beneath you. Scrambling to get your spot, scrambling to outpace your neighbor and take the shrinking gains as fast as you can, at any price until you can't pay the price anymore. They just kept buying and buying until you couldn't pay the price anymore. You're out this round. Better luck next time.
The whole bootstraps idea is becoming pretty silly of a thing to say to certain people when you're in a situation where you could be doing everything right, paying all your rent on time, going to work every day, and then all of a sudden they're just like, get out. Just get out of your house. And it's like, what are you supposed to do when there's not enough housing to meet the demands of people and there's not enough affordable housing at all? It's literally a crisis. And there is an article actually in Forbes that talks about this, where they say that the National Low-Income Housing Coalition estimates a shortfall of rental units for affordable or very low-income households. These are people that make minimum wage. 6.8 million units. So they're only building 110,000 affordable housing units a year. A lot of it's due to regulations and things like that, but they're only building 110,000 units a year, and they need 6.8 million. It doesn't take a brilliant rocket scientist to do the math on that and realize there's not enough affordable housing for people to go to.
Many smaller companies, using the same modern methods as the big fellows, have produced a major portion of the annual average of more than 1 million new homes during every year since 1948.
And Forbes actually admitted, and I thought this was very special of them, that part of this has to do with the redistribution of wealth and income over the last 4 years and the complete shrinking of the middle class, which is totally dying out. There are also charts out there about how a lot of people are having to live on credit now because the pandemic wiped out savings in the middle class completely for people. And so more and more people are living on credit. The whole thing is a giant recipe for disaster. Anyway, let's look at a few more of these comments. I got a whole bunch here. Western North Carolina. I am a teacher and cannot afford to buy a home here. I am new to the area. A rundown fixer-upper starts at $250,000. There are only 5 small apartment complexes in the area with less than 20 units, all low-income housing and all full. I am screwed. The locals are shocked. And I know teachers have historically been paid pretty low wages, but what does it say for the children in this teacher class when the teacher has to sit there and try to teach kids while in the back of the mind they're just thinking about, what am I going to do to keep a roof over my head? Because they might have to sleep in the car. And to that end, I don't even think the people who are living in the upper classes of this society are going to not be touched by this, because they rely on the people who are at the other end of the spectrum for all their services. So even if you live in an upper middle class or upper class neighborhood, or one of these crazy wealthy subdivisions like I drove through in Dallas where there's $7 million houses lining the street, that's all good and fine. But what happens when all of the people that you rely on for your landscaping and coming in to do maintenance on your house, and the people at the grocery store and the restaurants and the movie theater and getting your hair done and all that kind of stuff, what happens when those people can no longer afford to live? Because they're being priced out, because they don't make enough to keep a roof over their heads, and they don't make enough to continue to drive in to your $7 million neighborhood to do your stuff for you.
Frisco's Mayor Hunter Mortensen believes what's happening in all mountain communities is dire. In Frisco, for any residential property, the median price right now is $1.1 million. There's availability for people with deep pockets, but not for the workforce that keeps tourism alive.
We're really at risk of creating the modern era ghost town in our mountain towns, where the lights are on, but no one has a home to live in.
They're working to declare a state of emergency around housing, a position Estes Park is hoping to avoid.
Our economy is dependent upon that workforce. So if we don't provide a place for them to live, it's going to have some pretty horrendous effects.
Right? So this is not something that just gets to be felt by one set of people and everyone else gets to hide in their myopic little bubble and not think about it. We're in a giant economic ecosystem together. Okay, this is going to probably affect everybody, especially if it continues at the rate that it's going. I mean, this was already happening well before the pandemic started. A lot of these charts show that this was going on, that homelessness was rising before this, and people were having financial issues before the pandemic, and the pandemic just blew everything up insane. And they dumped more money into this economy than has ever been printed in this country, and inflation is now going off the charts, and this is a crisis. This person says they're a single mom, and where they live, there's zero affordable housing available, and they can't move out of the area. They're going to be homeless in 7 to 9 months. So there's more and more and more people who are being pushed into homelessness. This is literally causing an incredible homelessness crisis. And then you have people saying those people shouldn't be allowed to sleep in tents. They shouldn't be allowed to sleep in their car. But where, again, do they expect people to go? Because this is just getting worse literally everywhere across the nation. Prices are going up, and the availability of housing that people can afford is non-existent in many areas. And this whole situation is unfolding as I'm editing this video, as I'm trying to put this together. Stories are coming out just left and right everywhere. This one just came out. An Austin landlord who is a person, not a corporate entity, who's fighting property assessment hikes because he doesn't want to have to raise the rent. He has 6 fourplexes in Austin that he rents out as affordable housing to people, but the property values are being raised so high so quickly on these properties that these individuals can't, on the rent they're charging people, can't afford to pay these taxes. And he says, our tenants are mostly low income. They're all hardworking families. We don't want them to leave. We like having them as tenants. But if I can't fight this property tax hike, I'm going to have to increase everybody's rent by $100. Which, by the way, if you live in Austin and your rent only got increased $100, you're really, really lucky. And that's sad because there's a lot of people who live there that $100 that's make it or break it. That's keeping food on the table or not, or keeping the lights on or not. Okay. And he doesn't want to have to raise the rent on these people because they work, they're already being slammed right now. But what is he going to do when the property assessments jack up the taxes? And he says, when we do this rent increase, it's not putting any money into our bank accounts. It's strictly all going to the tax office. And there were people even talking about this over in my post on Instagram where I posted all these headlines. There are people in here talking about skyrocketing property taxes because that's also happening alongside of this. And there are people who can't afford to pay that. And this person says, I own my home, but only so long as they decide not to run him out at the cost of taxes. So that's another issue on the other side. This whole thing seems like it's ready to implode by design. And you don't have to type in the word homeless crisis or homelessness crisis. You will find news articles and stuff going on with that just everywhere right now. It's crazy. And right as all of this is going on, the homeless director of the LA Homeless Services just resigned. And she put up a whole article talking about what she thinks the reasons are for this. And she straight says in here that the crisis that they're experiencing is designed. We have designed the crisis we're experiencing. And she talks about all this bureaucratic red tape and all these issues, and how even the people who were working for homeless services were making very low wages to the point where they were needing help from some of the providers that were helping the homeless people. So it's just, I mean, this is the level, okay, that we're at. And I'm not from LA. I obviously don't know all the politics at play going on there, but it's kind of hard to argue with stats like this, where you have Los Angeles County Sheriff at a public forum last weekend claiming that Los Angeles County has spent a conservative estimate of $6.5 billion addressing the homelessness issue over the past 10 years, only to see the number of homeless people living in Los Angeles County increase from 39,000 people to more than 83,000 people in that time frame. $6.5 billion. New York lawmakers are urging the chief judge to avert eviction because a homelessness crisis is coming with what's about to happen with everybody. Hundreds of thousands of evictions right now in New York. And that's just New York. You could probably go to everywhere and find this. And again, this isn't just happening in the big cities, where, by the way, most of the jobs actually are that enable people to continue to pay for the things they have to pay for in this world. But I even had somebody write in and say that they live in a rural area in Indiana, and there's not even a Walmart in their town. So it's very small, rural town. They have to drive pretty far. I think they said 30 miles to get groceries. Even there, the rents are going up hundreds of dollars. So in a place where there's not even a Walmart to get a job at. For people watching this who aren't American or from America, if you don't have a Walmart in your town, Walmart likes to go everywhere. I mean, I live in a town with 23,000 people and there's a Walmart. So if you don't have a Walmart in your town, that's a small town, because Walmart likes to go everywhere they can. If they can make money off people, they will find a way to be in that town. And so if the person is living in a town, when they say this town doesn't even have a Walmart, they're trying to express that they live in a very small town, a small rural area that's probably not got a lot of businesses, probably doesn't have a lot of jobs. So to live in a place like that, where you're driving 30 miles just to buy food when you need to eat because there's not a grocery store or something available to you, and they're raising the rent even $100 or $200 a month on people living in trailers in the middle of nowhere, that should tell you something about what's going on. And for everyone who does live in America and thinks this is just an American thing, it absolutely is not. That's the other thing that's going on, because we're seeing homelessness set to rise, housing crisis type of headlines coming out of places like the UK, Australia, Germany, Canada. This is not just America. This is what looks like a controlled demolition globally.
We moved in here in 2010, 8 days before we had a baby, and we've been here ever since. So 11 years last September. I mean, 11 years is their lifetime, and for us it has been too. So we've planted deep, deep roots here in this specific neighborhood.
Melanie's family has rented this house for so long. It was a shock when her landlord called to say the family of 5 had to leave.
He said, well, I need to move in and renovate it to sell it. So I had 4 months notice to change my life of 11 years. I was devastated. We all cried. Literally, we cried. It is the not having options and not having anything that we've built matter at this stage of the game, because that's too bad for us. We're out.
The reality is there aren't enough homes to go around. Not enough new homes are being built, and that's a key factor driving up prices. But what's also true is that Canada is losing housing that once counted as affordable, and it's happening at a startling rate. We found one study that shows Canada lost more than 300,000 affordable units between 2011 and 2016.
George Parkin enjoys tending to his garden and hanging with his dog Baxter, but he lives at the whim of the rental market and fears he'll be homeless by April.
Sad, and it's really just, some nights I sit here and cry.
The pensioner rents his central Queensland property through the National Rental Affordability Scheme. It provides rental homes at 20% below the market rate for low and middle income households for 10 years through a federal government subsidy. But rent rises still occur.
My rent's going up $88 a week. Now, previous to that, my rent was 30% of my income. Now it's going up to 52%.
Rents have increased, in many cases more than 20% in the past year. It's just not possible for someone on a low income to find a rental that they can afford. So what we'll see is more and more people become homeless.
I don't think anybody in our society should have to live like this.
Up to 1 million people in Germany are considered homeless. Many have jobs and seem to live normal lives, but at night they hide away in vans, garages or cellars.
Tradespeople haven't had a wage increase for 10 years, and everything is getting more expensive. Rents are rising endlessly.
Back in the day when World Economic Forum put up the "you will own nothing and like it," we were one of the only channels even talking about that. That was well before COVID. That was well before all of this. And honestly, we were pretty much cracking jokes throughout that video because it just seemed like such a ridiculous thing to tell people.
This goes beyond anything. It's straight into Marxist serfdom. Actually, without the problem of work and without the problem of the working man's struggle. So it's neo-feudalism, but with a new twist. Here's how it goes. Here's what Ida Aachen wrote in her column for Davos. Welcome to the year 2030. Welcome to my city. Or should I say, our city. I don't own anything. I don't own a car. I don't own a house. I don't own any appliances or any clothes. I sound like I'm from a Dr. Seuss novel.
Now we're in a situation where, you know what people don't like? Not being able to afford basic life. Basic, dignified life. When I was a kid, I remember Chris Farley on SNL. That's how old I am when I was a kid. He used to do this sketch where parents would hire him as a motivational speaker.
Now, as your father told you, my name is Matt Foley, and I am a motivational speaker.
He would come into the living room and do this whole spiel about, if you make bad life decisions, kids, you're going to be living in a van down by the river. Do you guys remember that? I used to laugh my butt off as a little kid thinking that was hilarious.
First off, I am 35 years old. I am thrice divorced, and I live in a van down by the river.
We're to the point now. Fast forward to 2021, and here's a news report that came out last summer out of Denver. People are being priced out of apartments and houses, and they're turning to living in vans.
Housing prices have some Coloradans reconsidering whether home requires a house. Some make this choice because they feel like they have no other option.
Van is where it all started, and we couldn't have done it without this particular van.
They decided to move out of their Littleton apartment when they say living in the Denver metro became unaffordable for hourly workers.
And I don't know what's going to happen to generations like my son's generation and the children that are being born today, because it's not like you could just get out of high school and then suddenly you're qualified to get any kind of job that will enable you to live any kind of place other than your parents' basement, or with 15 roommates, or in your car. Or the other option, take out some predatory student loans that will compound you with interest and fees so that $15,000 loan ends up being $80 or $100 or $120,000. And good luck getting a job that will enable you to be able to pay such an insane amount back. This is why we have an almost $2 trillion student loan debt bubble right now. And those people can't afford to buy a house. A lot of those people are also living with 15 roommates or in their parents' basement. This isn't going to be able to continue this way. It just isn't. Some people might think I'm being a little hyperbolic in this report, but I think I'm understating the level of where we are. I mean, Soylent Green was set in 2022. The movie Soylent Green, it was set in 2022.
You tell everybody. Listen to me, Hatcher. You gotta tell them Soylent Green is people!
And in 2022, we have reports coming out of San Francisco of people living in $1 million condos overlooking some of the worst squalor, they're calling it. That's their words. Some of the worst squalor in San Francisco.
It's a street residents say they're afraid to drive through, and most wouldn't dare walk through it, day or night. And it's all within feet of the Artani, a modern condominium on Van Ness where units have sold for more than $1 million.
There are people living in $1 million condos, which overlook the street that's filled with homeless people. And they can't even, they're almost like trapped in their condo. They can't even really leave their house because there's so many homeless. It's almost exactly like Soylent Green, which, by the way, was literally set in 2022.
That makes it 279 Ds and 15 cents.
So here we are in 2022, and that's basically what's up for a lot of people. I mean, other than everybody getting green food pellets that's people, what's the difference? Billionaires Row in New York City, Billionaires Row, where they have apartments that people buy them because they have lots of money. They don't even go live there. It's like collecting art, but they collect these giant penthouse apartments that cost like $169 million. They never even freaking live in it.
Is a pretty global demographic. So there's a lot of pied-à-terre, so part-time owners. There's a lot of investor owners. You know, we're selling the penthouse right now, 432 Park, for $169 million US. The owner's never been there. And it's an investment, you know, it's an asset. It's like owning, you know, a Picasso. New York City had status symbol projects prior to Billionaires Row, but never like it does now.
They're having to put in homeless shelters on the ground floor.
1,000 feet in the air sit penthouses worth tens of millions of dollars. Skyscrapers on Manhattan's Billionaires Row are home to some of the world's wealthiest people. But standing in the shadow, down here on ground level, are some new neighbors on West 58th Street. The building is now operating as a men's homeless shelter.
The realization of the American dream, the envy of the entire world.
They're projecting that homelessness is probably about to be a pretty big thing in this country. And the more that this continues with the raising of rents and the cost of living and the wages not meeting that demand, and then you have supply chain stuff going on and inflation going on, all this other stuff, something is going to have to change, because this is about to become a massive crisis in a way that it's not going to just correct itself, you know, in a few months. They're projecting that the cost of housing, buying houses, and renting is set to continue to rise this year. It's just going to keep going up. So I don't know what they expect people to do. This society where every aspect of our lives has become commodified and it's crazy expensive just to exist. In the 21st century right now, as it stands, just to exist in society at all is insane. Just to live. And there's no end to this right now in sight. I mean, you have states that are literally making it illegal to camp and sleep in your car. And I just, again, I don't know what they expect people to do when they price everybody out of basic life. I think it gets to a point for certain people that once they fall behind so far and they lose so much, people just start giving up because it becomes this insurmountable hill they can't climb anymore. And whatever the inevitable solution is, because there's going to have to be something at this point, it needs to maintain basic human dignity. It needs to maintain the rights, the inalienable, inherent rights that humans have been fighting for in the modern era for hundreds of years. Anything else will just be going backwards. Devolving. Devo. I have noticed that anytime I discuss
censored,
even just in a historical context, even just sharing a picture of a flag from that time period and talking about it in a historical context, my posts get shadow banned on Twitter and Instagram. But one of the things that isn't really discussed a whole lot about the American Revolution is the fact that one of the big issues leading up into that was the wealth gap and the fact that people were having an extremely hard time financially in the situation as it was, and then they levied more and more and more taxes, and it just went all to hell. And I'm saying something in this country right now, at the point we are now at, is going to have to change with all of this. This situation where all of these prices just continue to go up and up and up and price people out of basic necessities like shelter, whole families and everything else, and people living in their car, and hundreds of thousands of people now out on the street. There's projections that it's at least 600,000 homeless people now and growing. Actually, that number comes from 2020, so I have no idea what it is these days, but the number of people who are homeless is just going up and up, and that doesn't count the number of people living out of their cars. We don't even know how many people are living in their cars right now. It's a lot of people. This can't just continue. It's not sustainable. I mean, what happens when large portions of this country get everything they have taken from them and have nothing else to lose? You want to talk about the tiny fragments left of glue that's holding society together at all. This is not going to be something that even the people at the tippy top are going to be able to just avoid dealing with. This is everybody. We're all in this. I mean, this is every city across this country is feeling some portion of this situation. And in some places, it's becoming hellholes out there. I mean, it's getting pretty bad. It's interesting. Last month, I actually overheard somebody say, I don't think they have enough police to evict everybody. So that's the level people are talking. Anyway, we have seen this everywhere, and we've been hearing from people, and so many people are being affected by this. There has got to be a fundamental change in the way that things are done. People cannot continue to exist this way. I truly love you guys. I will talk to you soon.